Howdy, and welcome to episode 4 of Spelunking in Space, the internet's most popular video game space spelunking show as far as I know. In this episode, we are going to be exploring a red star system. So after the initial 3 episodes, I got a lot of positive responses of you guys, being interested in seeing new types of caves and continuing the series. So what I decided to do is for the next 3 episodes, including this one, I'm going to be visiting uncharted systems. So for those of you that aren't familiar, uncharted systems are systems that have no civilization. So no space stations, no planetary outposts, nothing like that, no NPCs. Well, except for the occasional fugitive pirate. But I'm beginning with the red system today, the system of Regine? I suppose naming it, I get to decide how it's pronounced. Although I just used the procedural name, as you can probably tell. I'll call it Regine. So previously, all 3 episodes took place in systems where I've already built bases. And so I was really just moving from planet to planet that I'd already discovered and looking in the caves and recording that footage. For this series, it's a little bit more of an expedition, in that I had to find a red star system that was uncharted with 6 planetary bodies to explore. And then it actually took me a long time to find caves in some of these planets. For example, the first planet coming up took me over an hour to record the roughly 3-4 minutes of footage you're gonna see. But I think it was worth it, because surprisingly, even after, 3 episodes of looking at just caves, there are still some really cool things in this episode that I hadn't seen in any of the previous 18 caves. So without further ado, let's move on to our first planet. So this first planet is what the game describes as a fiery dread world. I think that makes a lot of sense if you just look around. This is Lewi Taku. I've also included glyphs in case you're interested in visiting yourself. So right off the bat, we have something that we hadn't seen before, which is a mossy cave, but it's not, the moss isn't green for once. And this might have something to do with the fact that it's not on a cold planet, but still, this is the first time I'd seen it with orange, or simply any warm color. And it's pretty well lit. There are a lot of troglodyte tulips on the ceilings. And it took me a while to even find these caves, like almost an hour. But I didn't want to leave because I thought there might be more to this planet. And I'm glad I stayed, because this chamber right here is probably one of the most spectacular I've seen in all of No Man's Sky. So of course I don't have to explain why. But these disc fungus are really cool to see. Here we also have a look at the moss, which again isn't green for the first time. So here we have a good look at the detail on this fungus. And there's a surprising amount of variation in these, but it's a little tough to tell because their silhouettes are so similar across different planets. But maybe that's something we'll be able to highlight as we continue to find more. So down here, this part of the cave is infested with a lot of plants and things from the surface, which creates this really interesting little landscape underground. Mixture between one side is covered in fungus, one in troglodyte tulips, one in moss, and then the floor is just covered in the infestation. So this chamber is actually near the exit of the cave, and I was really impressed to find this too, because it's pretty much a pit just filled to the brim with these fungi. And here is a daytime view of this portion of the cave, which is something I like to include just to give you an idea of how this cave might look when you visit yourself. Alright. But as much as I would love to stay on this planet, we have 5 to go, so better get going. So Luckily, this second planet revealed its secrets a lot sooner. Duking Y22. Luckily, I landed, and within about 15 seconds I found a cave worth exploring. However, this planet's cave systems are quite dark, quite cold. I believe the temperature inside the cave was something like negative 19 degrees Fahrenheit. And as you can see from this footage, I mean, it is just chilly in here. Now, towards the end of this cave, there is a bit of bioluminescence, but for the most part, this area was quite dark. So you've probably noticed by now that on the ceilings of this cave are these strange, round, mossy rocks that I had not come across anywhere else in my playthroughs as far as I can remember. And they're accompanied by these really lumpy stalactites, which actually fit the aesthetic really well, as do the egg-like structures littering the cave floor. Here we can get a better look at them. Quite cool. So this also gives us a hint of the cave's primary color, which appears to be green. And here I'm using a flashlight to see some of the detail here. So these spiky things are actually plants. There's a whole bunch of small rocks littering the cave floor. And this, I think this might be the tallest, or at least the narrowest column of cobalt I've ever come across. So I figured that was worth sharing. Here we have a really nice little overhang. So this is an example of some of the tight spaces that I needed to crawl through to find some of the more magnificent caverns. And here is a cavern you saw earlier, but the shape is a lot more apparent when you have this sort of fog in here. I just love the way it opens up. But okay, that's enough of that planet. Here we are on the radioactive world of Ergam 19. That's a proper sci-fi looking landscape if you ask me. So beneath here, what do you know? It's a lush cave. The first we've seen in this system so far. Here you can see some water dripping and some stuff that we've seen before, including these pools of liquid collecting. We also have these great bioluminescent mushrooms all over the floor. So here with the flashlight, we actually get a better idea of the color of the rocks here. And as you can see, they're less of a gray and more of a reddish brown, which is pretty cool. Pretty difficult to see at night, but with the flashlight, its character is a little more obvious. It's pretty cool to think about the different types of materials that make up these caves on different planets. I love these little clovers too. See here, we have a better look at those bioluminescent mushrooms. And a couple different types of troglodyte tulips. Beautiful cave system, but we must move on. And these tubers here are something that I didn't see for most of the cave. And when I did see them, they stand out quite a bit thanks to their pink coloration. So I figured I'd include them here. Alright, so this is an anomalous planet that goes by Vettaw Prime. And underground, the anomalies continue, believe it or not. So here we can see a gravitational anomaly right here inside the opening of this cave. Pretty cool. Alright, another cool thing I found were these green dihydrogen crystals. And at first, I didn't think they were dihydrogen. So as you can see here, I take a look, I scan them, I confirm that they are dihydrogen. Then I think maybe it's just the lighting of this cave. But even with a flashlight on them, they're purely green. Which for those of you who don't know, green crystals are extremely rare in this game. So finding them here in this cave is pretty spectacular. They did used to be more common in earlier versions of the game, but in today's version of No Man's Sky, finding them is a rare treat. So, as you may have noticed, this is a rocky cave. It's got a pretty neutral bioluminescence, but pay attention to these little yellow circles on the ground. We'll come back to those later. But here we have a lot more of these spiky plants. They seem to be a feature of this system, as well as a bunch of stalactites and stalagmites. It all builds up to a really spectacular cave system. And I might be partial, but I think the rocky caves might be my favorite type, just because they remind me so much of the limestone caves here in South Texas. Here we have a detailed look at just the ton of stalagmites on the ground. I love these things. One of my favorite additions to the game. Again, we also have that brown coloration. Less of a red than the last planet, though. And of course, it wouldn't be a cave video without appreciating one of these chandelier-like structures. When I look at this, it really does look like something I'd see at Natural Bridge Caverns or something similar. Of course, minus the bioluminescence. But nowadays, you usually have nice spotlights illuminating a cave, so it gives off a similar feel. One last look at this system before we move on to what is surprisingly another planet of light. So this is a very similar planet topside, No-HUD 92. And maybe not surprisingly, its subterranean world is quite similar to the last as well. They're both rocky type caves with neutral bioluminescence. However, this one has something completely different than the other. I'm talking about these little bioluminescent circles, similar to what we saw in the other cave, but these are actually glowing on their own. And there's also just a ton of these little bulbous mushrooms, which gives this cave an entirely different feel from the last one. You can also see a lot more rocky structures popping out of the ceiling as opposed to stalactites, which is pretty cool too. So even though this is a similar rocky cave style with similar color and even those little spiky plants we just passed, the absence of the smaller stalactites and stalagmites and the addition of these mushrooms and bioluminescent plants gives it its own character, while still making it feel like, there's some sort of relation between all the caves in this system, featuring some similarities. which I think from like, say, an evolutionary or geological standpoint does make some sense. Some. I just love this shot here. The green stands out so much when you use your flashlight, which I had to use a lot more in this system, partially because of a lot of dimly lit caves, but also because the TV I was recording on was a lot dimmer than my usual one, so I really couldn't see without a flashlight. Luckily though, that gives us a better look at a lot of the details that we might otherwise miss if we were just relying on natural light. So I think it was worth it in the end. So, we've already landed on our final planet, Tibetsy. And this, it is a toxic world, but it's an anomalous toxic world. And that continues to its cave system. So if you look up, we're looking at something we haven't seen in caves and something I don't normally see, which are those pink crystal structures. But we'll come right back to those. So here we can see some very similar mushrooms and egg structures to the other caves, as well as those strange mossy circular structures on the ceiling. So this feels like an amalgamation of what we've seen before. But then you have these semicircles with pinkish crystals growing out of them, which I hadn't seen in any cave before, I don't think ever. And this is sort of a strange phenomenon that I'll cover more soon. But check out this sentinel I found in the caves. Again, not something you see very often, but pretty cool. And I don't know if you can tell, but to the left on the screen there, that rock is just sort of penetrating the cavern. It doesn't seem native to it. And here we can see on the cobalt columns the green color palette. I mean, the green color palette's pretty obvious overall, but... Oh, and then here we have starfish covered rocks, which, again, not something I've ever seen in a cave before, and just a quirky characteristic of this planet. So this shot is just showing how dangerous it is sometimes to go spelunking in space. You never know where the next turn's going to take you. And this slide ended up bringing me to this beautiful cavern, although I did take a little bit of damage to get here. Just look at this place though, totally worth it. I love this shot of just the natural light. This cave is actually one of the best lit in the entire system. And it also happens to be my favorite color. But just look at this. This is one of the largest caverns I've come across. And it is spectacular. And remembering, of course, that it's a toxic world above, this green lighting with these mushrooms and growths feels even more appropriate. Oh, so here we have the regular cave rock, which is something you might be familiar with. However, as we move to the left, you can see a bit more porousness coming into the rocks. And on that porous area, that's where we have these structures growing, which is interesting. It seems like the game was using different types of rocks. And here we even have more rocks from the surface. So that just seems to be a characteristic of this planet. And before I leave, I thought it would be cool to open one of these up, in case you hadn't seen what an albumin pearl looks like out in the wild. Now you have. And just look at this backdrop. But unfortunately, that is the last planet in today's showcase. So overall, I really enjoyed this system. It felt like I was genuinely spelunking, looking across all these uncharted systems, seeing things that I hadn't really seen in some cases, because I don't spend a lot of time outside of civilized space. So getting to see a red star system unoccupied was pretty cool. I also made a new companion friend, which you can find the coordinates for on screen right now, if you're interested in adopting one of your own. But alright, that's going to wrap up this week's episode. Well, I say weeks, but I don't know if this is necessarily a weekly series. But rest assured, episode 5 is coming, and I will be exploring a green star system just as soon as I locate one. Hopefully we'll see some new things there as well. This system surprisingly had a very consistent aesthetic to it. It had a lot of bulbous structures. We saw certain elements sort of repeat, and that's pretty cool because we had seen some similar things in the past systems where they sort of carry a similar characteristic throughout each planet. And hopefully next system will have, its own identity and some more cool sights to see, some more firsts. But thanks again for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed it, let me know by leaving a like. That really helps. Lets me know you like it. And leaving a comment, let me know which one of these caves was your favorite or least favorite. What are you looking forward to? Have you found any crazy caves of your own lately? And if you're interested in seeing more, go ahead and subscribe as well. I'm doing my best to produce high quality content, and every bit of support helps me do that, helps encourage me, and I appreciate each and every subscription I get. So thanks again for watching, thanks for spelunking with me, and I will see you next time. See ya!